So today again, we're in mid-January. The Schengen agreement is in the spotlight as they decide whether they're going to force the constituent countries to this Schengen agreement, which is basically just dismantling of border security. It's meant to allow free passage of European citizens throughout the European Union to treat it as one state. So in effect it'd be like England and Scotland. I mean, that's probably the best example. It would be the case that you could just pass from France into Germany as easily as you pass from England to Scotland or into Wales and back out, and it's just meant to be just like that. It's a noticeable border, but there's no security at it or anything. So this is really reminding me of the Three Little Pigs story, where there's the house of straw, the house of wood, and there's a house of brick. And the three little pigs each build themselves a house. I mean, you'll know this story. But it turns out, of course, the big bad wolf is able to destroy the house of straw and the house of wood, but the house of brick is sufficiently strong to stand up to any attack. Then the three little pigs can regroup and decide how to attack the wolf. Okay, so we have an extremist infiltration program going on, which they've called the migrant crisis. And I think it was fair to call it a migrant crisis up until wholesale they were just, I don't know if the proper word to use is an army, but until wholesale people were literally trampling over border posts. The Schengen thing really took off in 2007 when there's a whole eastern raft of countries in Europe, Hungary and so on, they came in on board. Latvia, Poland, all those countries came on board, which opened up a whole eastern side and really brought all of Europe, mainland Europe, properly into the fold of Schengen, of dismantling borders. So by 2009, the Hungarians had taken down their barbed wire or razor wire. 2015, they were putting it all back up. So we had a whole 6 years where we let security go, and all the time, of course, there's been aggravation going on in Afghanistan and Iraq, and Syria kicked off, and then it really became the case that I would say you only got a couple of years, and it's almost as if, so I would say it is the case, that whatever Saudi Wahhabist sponsoring of extremists there is, it's almost as though it took them just a couple of years to get to grips with the fact that Europe had let its guard down, and then it started pushing people out there. So the migrant problem turned into a crisis when really I don't think the problem are people coming over in boats and stuff. Those are desperate people trying to get across. I know this much. Extremists don't risk their neck. They may blow themselves up in the end or get shot dead, but I don't care what anyone says. This is a situation they do not risk their necks unnecessarily. So I would say that most people that come across meaning harm to Europe would come across a safe way. I bet half of them got in cars or took an airplane to somewhere and then made their way to the group of migrants in the area and just joined in. They just joined the line. You've got to think of this as people piggybacking onto a real problem. So when we talk about Muslims being a problem, I don't know what other people mean, I don't mean all Muslims. I mean simply that there are some who have capitalised on the genuine migrant crisis, they've piggybacked on, and they've inserted themselves into the real problem of migrant a movement of people, a mass movement of people to get away from Syria or wherever. But these extremists have inserted themselves into that group and used them as cover. Just use them as a shield to move into Europe. Now, I'm not going to keep saying what needs to be done. Obviously, they need to put their mugshots up on a website and invite people from in the Middle East to contribute information as to the past of these unknown people. until we build up a picture of the past of these people, a history, you're not really safe from the extremists. You need to pinpoint extremists, and the way you do that is by building up a history of everybody, all the individuals that have come over. I don't care if it's 1 million or 2 million, all of them. You build up that picture, and then you can know whether you're safe or not. I'm reminded of another story that's out today, which is the Paul Worthington story. He's a child abuser, and I'm not connecting that with this story. But the point about him is, he was known as far back, I mean, I say he's a child abuser, he's not proved to be a child abuser, he's an alleged child abuser. Going back to 1995, the guy was brought in for questioning. It's taken until 2013 for somebody to knowingly have died in his presence, for that somebody to be a baby, and for them to have known to have been abused. But nobody's actually able to lay it at this guy Paul Worthington's door, because they're lacking evidence, because the police bungled or whatever they did. So look at that, that's 1995 to what, 2016. So that's 20 years for it to almost be proven. But the point is, had his spouse known that he had this history, she might never have got together with him. So I guess what I'm saying is, we have to uncover the last 10 or 20 years of history that this surge of migrants have. Then we'll know that we're safe with them. And unfortunately, until that point, you're not safe. And Muslims aren't safe either. So there's no point in people saying, you know, they're safe when we know they aren't. The Schengen thing is now going to either fall apart, or people are going to cement themselves into it. The problem is that effectively what this is people crying out to stay in their house of straw. Now you've got to remember now, we're at a dangerous situation where, I call it dangerous not because so much it's physically more dangerous, but because politicians have now welded themselves to the Schengen agreement, and they've pinned their colours to the mast of what their political stance is on these businesses, on these matters. So Angela Merkel, she's pinned herself to the mast of letting people through and being open and all that. How does she now turn around and say these people need to be held, contained within a town or within encampments, with their own schooling and medical and whatever, but we've got to keep tabs on them? At the very least, and I say this in all honesty, it doesn't matter whether they would be blonde-eyed, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Germans, or what they would be. You need to stick some kind of a tab on them, some kind of a strap on them that is electronic tagging, until you know for sure that you've got a background check done on them. And that's only what you would have done if you had proper security anyway. So all I'm advocating is to catch up on what I would call normal security. Europe has failed to reinforce its borders to take account of the fact they weakened the internal borders. It's the Titanic thing I've explained elsewhere. The outer hull of the Titanic needed to be stronger, given that the inner compartments didn't work in the end, because they weren't built properly, it turns out. So Europe, if we're going to have the weak internal borders, you have to have, you know, if you're going to have your straw house inside, you're going to have your brick house outside. The UK is lucky we've got a brick house. We're not part of the Schengen agreement. We're not subject to the counterfeiting that's going on, which has now been found because they blew up somewhere in Syria or somewhere, and and the drone got a picture of all this money blowing into the air. Well, there's only two main currencies. There's the American dollar and there's the euro. So we're not part of the Schengen dismantled borders agreement. We're not part of the euro currency agreement, and we're an island. So Britain is, the UK is the brick house. And if you think that the fact that London house prices are through the roof is just to do with it's such a lovely place to live, you're crazy. The reason London house prices are through the roof is because rich people from abroad recognise that the UK, and especially London, is a brick house. Of the three little piggies, you could say that Germany has opened itself up to be a straw house. France, it's got plenty of soldiers, plenty of armed police, It does have the correct necessary security attitude in some respects. It is the wooden house, but the UK is the brick house. So Europe has to get itself in order, and I've got a feeling that the current crop of politicians may or may not be the ones to do it. I think the likes of Merkel would have to do such an about turn, such a U-turn, a volte-face, that she can't really stay and do what needs to be done. And the biggest favour that a lot of these places could do themselves is to turn down now the Schengen agreement. These countries maybe need to say, you know, if Europe can't get together and patrol its borders and have a brick border around it, the brick house of the three little piggies, you can't have a straw house inside. You're going to have to either reinstate the borders or have a rock hard outer border. So which is it going to be? Either way costs money. If you want the Schengen, fair enough, but you'll still have to have ad hoc checks. I mean, in America, they still have state patrols. And you can still be stopped from going from one state to another if you've committed certain crimes. And at the minute, you don't need to commit a crime for that to be the case. We're in a kind of emergency situation. I think you would have to say that anyone who has an unknown history can't really be allowed to float around. And the Eritrean that killed somebody in the Swedish IKEA killed a mother and a son. I mean, they've been throwing all sorts of stuff out there about, but let's just say they were an Eritrean. And that's because they were told to go back to Italy, because they committed something there that the police wanted them for. I'm not saying it's a big deal, but they didn't want to go back. They obviously thought they were going to end up in an Italian jail. So what they did was, this is serious now, this is unbelievable, they appear to have killed 2 Swedish people because they wanted to stay in a Swedish jail. Now that shows you what can happen. You're not dealing with European mentality now. You're dealing with a mentality that's come from a fighting region, a war zone. And that's completely different people. You need different laws for different people. How can we do that within Europe? The way you can do that is by knowing people's background as well as you know any European's background. And until you're up to about that standard of knowing these people's history, these individuals' history, you're really not able to categorically state that you are safe having the same laws for these people as for everybody else. So the practical way to proceed is to know their history. So that's really it. And like I say, London, the house prices are so high because foreigners recognise it's a safe place. Instead of a moat nowadays around London, instead of a ring of steel, you've got a ring of cameras. The M25 forms a ring of cameras around London. The M25 is the moat around London. I won't be the first person to notice this. And that's why it's the brick house within the brick house. So Europe has to get itself together, and I'm not sure the current crop of politicians have got the balls to do it. You're going to have to be firm. And it's not just for white European safety, it's for Muslim safety as well. This is turning into a very dangerous and nasty situation, and unless you get a grip on it and have a known history for the people who have, let's face it, just trampled across border guard patrols, nobody's going to be safe. I'm only asking that they catch up now with what they should have done in the first place. Go on YouTube, you can see the footage anywhere on YouTube. Soldiers, armed guards on the borders, waves of people just walking through them. Once they saw that they weren't going to open fire, that was it. These people have come from a place where life is cheap. If you treat life as expensive, suddenly they realise they have the power and they'll just walk through the lines, whereas a lot of white Europeans or just Europeans of any colour would not walk through the lines of armed police. That's how it is. Buckingham Palace, it has 2 armed police outside. I'm sure they have more now, but I saw 2 guys with Heckler and Koch machine guns, and I know not to pass through there. But if you've got a bunch of people, a mob, who have come from a war zone, would they take just 2 armed guards who aren't pointing the guns at them and not willing to fire a shot? Would they take that as a reason not to go straight through? So for everybody's benefit, Europe has to tighten up, and we have to know the history of the people who have come in. That much is absolutely fair. Thanks for watching and listening.